You came to see the Coming to America cast now and then in 2026, and the answers run from joyful to heartbreaking. Some built dynasties and married late. Others left the screen entirely. 4 of them have died, and where their stories ended will stay with you. The first face that comes to mind when anyone says this title belongs to Eddie Murphy, who played Prince Akeem of Zamunda, the royal who crossed an ocean to find a woman who would love him for himself rather than his crown. Murphy was 27 when the film opened in the summer of 1988, and he did something unexpected with the part. He played the loudest comic role of his life as the quietest man in the room, saving the wild energy for the barbershop, where he disappeared under makeup into a half-dozen other characters. Audiences laughed at the old men arguing about boxing, then fell for the prince standing shyly at the McDowell's counter. Brooklyn made him before Hollywood ever did. Murphy lost his father young, spent part of his childhood in state care, and turned a gift for impressions into a spot on Saturday Night Live at 19, where Buckwheat and Mr. Robinson pulled the show back from the edge of cancellation. By the time he reached Zamunda, he had already carried 48 Hours, Trading Places, and Beverly Hills Cop. Here is where the money turned strange. Murphy earned a reported $8 million for the film, plus a share of the back end, and the picture went on to gross close to $289 million worldwide against a budget near $36 million. Then, a humorist named Art Buchwald sued Paramount, claiming the story came from his treatment. He won. The court tore open the studio's accounting and called its definition of net profit unconscionable, because a film that earned nearly $289 million somehow showed no profit on paper at all. Murphy was never the wronged party in that fight, since he was the highest-paid man on the lot. The cruelty was that his own story credit became the very thing the studio used to argue Buchwald deserved nothing. Decades later, the prince is 65 and richer than ever, with a fortune estimated between $200 and $300 million, a Beverly Hills estate, and a private island in the Bahamas. He married Australian model Paige Butcher in 2024, returned as Axel Foley in a Netflix sequel that paid him another $15 to $20 million, and built a family of 10 children he has called the center of his life. In 2025, his son Eric married Martin Lawrence's daughter, tying 2 comedy families together by marriage. Prince Akeem went searching for one true thing in a world that only saw his title. Eddie Murphy spent 40 years proving the boy from the projects could buy the island and still raise the family his own father never gave him. Second on this list is the man whose voice you would know in Total Darkness. James Earl Jones played King Jaffe Joffer, the father who arrives in Queens convinced he can simply collect his runaway son and carry him home to the bride already chosen. Jones was 57 that summer, and he used that ground-shaking bass to make a man who is wrong about almost everything feel like the center of gravity in every scene. The comedy of the king is that all that thunder is aimed at something small, a father who cannot understand why his prince will not just do as he is told. What few viewers knew is that the voice almost never existed. As a boy in Mississippi and then Michigan, Jones developed a stutter so severe that he went functionally mute for years, communicating and writing until a high school teacher drew him back to speech through poetry. The man who would become the most recognizable sound in modern movies once could barely finish a spoken sentence. Money tells a quiet story here too. Jones earned a modest fee for voicing Darth Vader in the first Star Wars, reportedly a flat sum in the low thousands, and for years he asked to go uncredited, letting the mask keep the mystery. He defined screen villainy for an entire generation and took a session player's wage to do it. The wealth came later and steadily, through Shakespeare, through Broadway, through Mufasa, and 100 other roles, until he left behind an estate estimated near $40 million. The honors filled a shelf few performers ever reach, including 3 Emmy Awards, a Grammy, 3 Tony Awards, an honorary Oscar, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Screen Actors Guild. He married actress Cecilia Hart in 1982, and that marriage held for 34 years until cancer took her in 2016. He never remarried, and he raised their son Flynn, far from Hollywood on land he had fallen for during a road trip in 1970, eventually buying 10 neighboring properties so no one could crowd him. On the early morning of September 9, 2024, James Earl Jones died of natural causes at that home in Pawling, New York, at the age of 93, with his family near. There was no public funeral procession and no marked monument for crowds to visit. He was cremated, and after a private family ceremony, his ashes stayed with the people who loved him, kept close rather than placed anywhere a stranger could find. King Jaffe Joffer commanded a kingdom with a single look. James Earl Jones built that command out of a childhood in which he could not speak at all. The third entry played the man you were supposed to dislike. Eriq La Salle was Darryl Jenks, the slick heir to the Soul Glow hair fortune, the suitor Lisa is expected to marry and obviously cannot stand. La Salle was 25, and he committed so fully to the character's oily confidence, all gleaming jerry curl and certainty, that the role became one of the funniest things in the film. The joke only works because he plays a man who truly believes he is the prize. Hartford raised him. One of 4 children brought up by his mother, La Salle trained at the Artists Collective, spent 2 years in the drama division at Juilliard, then finished a fine arts degree at New York University. He was a serious stage actor playing a punchline, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The career took a turn almost no one in that theater would have predicted. After coming to America came Jacob's Ladder, and then the role that made him a household fixture, Dr. Peter Benton on the medical drama ER, a part he held for 8 seasons and returned to for the show's farewell. That work earned him 3 NAACP Image Awards and nominations for a Golden Globe and 3 Primetime Emmys. Then, while still acting, he slid behind the camera. His real second act is financial as much as creative. Rather than chase fading acting paychecks, La Salle built a steady living as a director and producer across networks, spending 4 years as an executive producer on Chicago PD and directing across the Law and Order universe, then adding author income with a trilogy of crime thrillers published in 2022 and 2023. In 2025, he created, produced, directed, and starred in the Prime Video police series On Call, doing 4 jobs on one show. At 63, he has quietly become one of television's most reliable directors, a man who turned a single ridiculous haircut into a 40-year career on both sides of the lens. Darryl Jenks was the punchline who thought he was the hero. Eriq La Salle was the trained artist who let the world laugh, then walked behind the camera and ran the room. Fourth on this list is the man whose death became a courtroom story. John Amos played Cleo McDowell, the fast food owner guarding both his daughter and a restaurant logo that looked suspiciously like a certain set of golden arches. Amos was 48, a former college football player from Newark who had already lived several careers, and he played Cleo's pride completely straight, which is exactly why the running joke about the difference between McDowell's and McDonald's lands every single time. Before any of this, he was the father of television's most honest, struggling family. Amos played James Evans on Good Times, and in 1976 he was pushed off that show after 3 seasons. He had clashed with the writers, arguing that the series was drifting toward cartoonish comedy and away from the hard truth of a black family scraping by. He later said he was let go not over salary but because the producers decided he complained too much, and they killed his character off at the peak of the show's success. The numbers around the end of his life are difficult to read. After 54 years of work across Good Times, Roots, The West Wing, and 2 trips to Zamunda, multiple outlets reported John Amos died with a net worth near $300,000. In June of 2023, his daughter Shannon launched a public fundraiser claiming her father was a victim of elder abuse and financial exploitation, seeking $500,000 and raising only about $13,000 before it was shut down. Amos himself disputed the campaign, calling it inaccurate and unauthorized. His death only deepened the fracture. On August 21, 2024, John Amos died of congestive heart failure at a hospital in Inglewood, California, at the age of 84. The world did not learn of it for more than 40 days, until his son announced it on the 1st of October, and his daughter has said she found out through the news like everyone else. He was cremated 9 days after he died, and his ashes remained in the keeping of his son at a private residence. The disposition listed simply as cremation at home, a quiet end wrapped in a family still arguing over how it happened. Cleo McDowell built a fortune one hamburger at a time and guarded it fiercely. John Amos gave 50 years to the screen and left behind a contested estate, a delayed obituary, and children at war over his final days. If John Amos was the television father of your own childhood, drop a comment and tell me which of his roles meant the most to you. I read everyone, and I want to know whether his story landed for you the way it landed for me. The fifth name threw the biggest party late-night television had ever seen. Arsenio Hall played Semmi, Prince Akeem's royal aide, the man who would rather sleep on silk than scrub floors in a queen's walk-up, and his pure exasperation drives the comedy of the film's first half. Hall was 32, a minister's son from Cleveland, who had been discovered in a comedy club by the singer Nancy Wilson, and he made Semmi the perfect foil, all wounded dignity against the prince's eager slumming. A year after this film, he changed his whole corner of the industry. The Arsenio Hall show launched in 1989 and ran 6 seasons, pulling hip-hop, a younger crowd, and a looser energy into a format that had belonged to older men in suits. He was the host a presidential candidate chose when he wanted to play the saxophone for a generation that did not watch the established programs. The end of that run carried a real cost. As the network wars of the early 1990s intensified, his show was squeezed out and ended in 1994, and a 2013 revival lasted a single season in a media world that had splintered into 1,000 screens. His fortune today sits in the range of $14 million and up, helped along by a 2012 win on Celebrity Apprentice that he turned into a $250,000 donation to the Magic Johnson Foundation rather than a paycheck for himself. The choice that defines him is the one he made off camera. After the show ended, Hall stepped back from the spotlight to raise his son, Arsenio Jr., born in 1999, largely as a single father. At 70, he is still performing stand-up, still telling stories about the old days, and still putting the boy he raised ahead of the career he could have chased harder. Semmi wanted the soft life of a palace and complained at every step away from it. Arsenio Hall built the loudest stage in television, then walked off it on purpose to go pack school lunches. Sixth on this list carried a secret for 13 years while the cameras rolled. Madge Sinclair played Queen Aeolian, the warm center of the palace and the only person King Jaffe truly listens to. And she gave the role a soft authority that made every glance at her son feel heavier than the throne behind her. Sinclair was 50, and she played the mother first and the monarch second, which is why her few scenes hold so much feeling. Jamaica shaped everything about her. Born in Kingston, she trained as a teacher and worked in classrooms until she was 30, then made a wrenching choice, leaving her 2 young sons with their father and sailing for New York in 1968 to chase acting from nothing. She modeled, she joined the Shakespeare Festival, and she slowly built a career solid enough to bring her boys to live with her in America. The hardest fact of her life never reached the screen. Shortly after she joined the cast of the series Trapper John, M.D. in the early 1980s, doctors told Madge Sinclair she had leukemia. She kept working anyway, year after year, outliving every prediction they gave her, drawing a steady television paycheck and 3 Emmy nominations from that show while privately carrying a diagnosis almost no one knew about. She and James Earl Jones, who played the king at her side, would reunite to voice Mufasa and Sarabi in The Lion King, 2 royal parents twice over. On December 20, 1995, after 13 years of fighting, Madge Sinclair died of leukemia at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles at the age of 57, her final performance having aired on television just 1 month earlier. 5 years after her death, the government of Jamaica gave her its Order of Distinction for her service to the arts. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were carried home and scattered across the island where she had once been a schoolteacher, returned at last to the place she left to chase a dream. Queen Aeolian never let her composure crack in front of the kingdom. Madge Sinclair played a queen of perfect calm while quietly living under a death sentence for 13 years, and almost no one in the audience ever knew. The 7th name never planned to act at all. Shari Headley played Lisa McDowell, the burger counter daughter who has to be the one woman worth crossing an ocean for, and she pulled it off by making Lisa grounded instead of glamorous, a young woman suspicious of anything that seems too smooth or too easy. Headley was 23, the youngest person in this story, and her warmth is the reason the whole fairy tale holds together. Medicine was supposed to be her path. The youngest of 4 children with Trinidadian roots, she lost her father, a dental technician who dreamed she would become a doctor, in 1982, and she was enrolled in a pre-med program when her sister mailed her photograph to the Ford modeling agency without telling her. That single envelope rerouted her entire life into modeling and then acting. Steady work followed, though never the kind that makes a person rich overnight. Headley has spoken honestly about the feast or famine reality of the working actor. The stretches of plenty followed by stretches of nothing, even after a hit as large as this one. Her most dependable income came from television, including years on the soap opera All My Children as Detective Mimi Reed, a role that earned her an NAACP Image Award nomination, and the kind of regular paycheck that film stardom alone never guaranteed. Her life off-screen stayed mostly her own. She married the rapper and actor Christopher Martin of Kid and Play in 1993, had a son named Skylar the following year, and divorced in 1995, raising the boy while continuing to work in films like The Preacher's Wife and series like The Haves and The Have-Nots. At 61, she returned to the role that started it all, playing Queen Lisa once more in the 2021 sequel. Lisa McDowell was the princess every viewer wanted the prince to choose. Shari Headley was the pre-med student who only became an actress because her sister put a photograph in the mail. Before the last name on this list, take 1 second to subscribe, because the man who closes it spent roughly 10 years hiding a cancer diagnosis while quietly turning in the best work of his entire career. You will want to see where he ended up. The final face behind the McDowell's counter belonged to a gentle giant from Minnesota. Louis Anderson played Maurice, the friendly employee, a small part that he filled with the same soft, self-deprecating warmth that made his stand-up feel less like a performance and more like a conversation with someone who already liked you. Anderson was 35, one of 11 children raised in St. Paul by a hard, alcoholic father whose shadow would later fuel much of his comedy. Television kept finding new uses for him. He hosted Family Feud from 1999 to 2002, created and voiced the animated series Life with Louie, which won him 2 Daytime Emmy Awards, and wrote 4 books, including a memoir built from letters to his late mother. His income never came from one enormous payday, since it came instead from decades of touring clubs, hosting, voice work, and writing, the patient grind of a comedian who never stopped working. Then, near the end, came the role of a lifetime. In 2016, Anderson won a Primetime Emmy for playing Christine Baskets, a grieving mother of grown twin sons on the series Baskets, tender and true and nothing like the comic everyone thought they knew. What the audience did not know is that he had been privately fighting cancer for roughly a decade while doing it, hiding the diagnosis even as the best reviews of his life poured in. On January 21, 2022, Louis Anderson died in a Las Vegas hospital at the age of 68 from complications of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, with his sisters and a close friend beside him after they came to say goodbye. He was not scattered to the wind or kept on a family shelf. He was carried back to Minnesota and buried at Acacia Park Cemetery in Mendota Heights, the one member of this group laid into the ground of the state that made him, a short drive from where he grew up, the second youngest of 11. Maurice was the kind face you barely noticed behind the counter. Louis Anderson was the man who hid a 10-year illness, won the best reviews of his life playing a mother, and went home to Minnesota to rest. Their final coordinates scatter wide. Ashes on a Jamaican hillside, ashes in a New York home, ashes in California, a grave in Minnesota, and 4 of them still here.